Master horse racing with daily racing forms Formulator, now free for DRF Bets members. Sign up to get the best bonus in racing with a $250 deposit match, plus a $10 free bet and free Formulator past performances. Go to drf.com/bet to play like a pro today.
Hi everyone, David Aragona and Craig Milkowski here, taking a look at one of the stakes on the Preakness undercard Saturday at Pimlico. Race 11 is the Grade 3 Maryland Sprint, going 6 furlongs for the older sprinters. We've got a field of 10 signed on for this one, Craig, and it's a pretty wide open competitive affair. The number 7, Nakatomi, who always seems to take a lot of money for trainer Wesley Ward, he is pegged as the slight favorite at 5-2 over the impressive last out winner, the number 8, Straight No Chaser. Both of these horses are shippers coming in to invade this local Maryland Sprint division, and they both have strong chances.
Yeah, there's some pretty good speed figures in here, particularly from sort of my namesake, Wonder Where Craig Is last time, who ran that big 123 off a layoff. So yeah, it's a good strong race for Grade 3.
Before we get into the main contenders, let's take a look at some features in Timeform US. First up is the finish projector. And Greg, no projection here for a particularly fast pace, though there is some speed signed on, so I won't be surprised if this does heat up on the front end a little bit, particularly between the two horses that are shown on the lead, the number 10, Wonder Where Craig Is, and the number 8, Straight No Chaser. They're both horses that want to be forward to have their best chance.
Yeah, to be clear, this is a pace projector. You misspoke just for a second there. Don't want to confuse people, but I think this is a race that's going to heat up pretty quick. Even though we don't have that fast pace flag, Wonder Where Craig is a fast horse. Straight No Chaser is as well. And I do have an idea that maybe the pace is going to be a little bit quicker than the projector thinks.
You will also note that the number 7, Nakatomi, is the one that gets that late pace flag. So if it does heat up, potentially that could suit the morning line favorite. Let's also move on from the pace projector to check out the finish projector for this race. And pretty similar situation here, Craig, with those two horses that were shown dueling for the lead still around at the finish, with the addition of Nakatomi, who obviously would benefit if the pace heats up on the front end.
Yeah, for sure. It's always a little tricky with speed horses. Maybe if there's only 2 of them in there, one of them proves superior and goes on to win. It's also possible that they're joined by a couple others who have shown speed, which we'll see as we go through this.
Let's go through some of the contenders, and we'll begin with one of those speed horses, the number 8, Straight No Chaser, and we'll take a look at his last replay from Oaklawn Park, where he was a 7 1/4 length winner against weaker competition that he'll be facing here, but he runs away from this field very impressively after leading in the early stages. Hadn't been quite as successful in his prior attempts against Stakes Company out in California, but at Oaklawn last time, he certainly looked like a horse with the ability to win a race like this.
He did. He ran that big speed figure. He got a 1:15, a 1:19 final time. And he had run a good race in the Palos Verdes. The competition was a little bit tougher than this field for sure, in my opinion. So he's a horse with some speed, and it's just a matter of how he's going to deal with Wonder Where Craig Is, because that one's quick as well. But he certainly has the credentials and the speed figures to contend.
Yeah, and I guess the negative with him is that he did take advantage of a blue color-coded pace figure situation last time, and probably not going to be the case in this stakes on Saturday at Pimlico. Up next is Wonder Where Craig Is. We'll take a look at his last race when he came off a layoff in mid-April at Laurel to win by a head, and this was a pretty gritty effort from him. Also in this race is War Toxin, a horse that I don't think we're going to spend a whole lot of time on, but Wonder Where Craig Is, second off the layoff. If he can repeat or improve on this performance, he definitely has a lot of back races that would make him a major player in here. But you could argue that in the last year or so, maybe his form hasn't been quite up to what it was in the past.
Yeah, he came back. He ran that big speed figure last time, which it kind of says maybe he is just as good, though he had tailed off before that long layoff of over 6 months. He had run 120 speed figures in the past. I do think he's the best horse in the field. The one concern with me is that race wasn't very long ago. It was just back in April. It's a race where he ran very hard off that long layoff. He dueled all the way around the track, was game. And I'm not a big bounce theory proponent, but this is one time where I do look out for it. Those horses that run just extremely difficult races off a long layoff.
And you will note that 123 speed figure that he got last time does take into account a big pace upgrade. That final time wasn't quite as fast, but he was engaged in that fast pace, so that's why that figure is so high compared to the final time number. And wonder where Craig is. He's run those kinds of numbers in the past, so he definitely is a player if he maintains that form. The number 7 is that morning line favorite, Nakatomi. Let's take a look at his race 2 back when he was 3rd in the Tom Fool. And Craig, when I watched this race and the race that came after it, the Commonwealth, just feels like he might have hung a little bit in the late stages each time. And for a horse that typically takes a lot of money, I want to see him finishing with a little more vigor.
I agree with you. He's a horse. I'm always baffled how much money he makes. I can never really find the races in his past performances to support it. I mean, don't get me wrong. He's a good horse. He's won a lot of money, but at this class level, he always seems to not really come up with his best race. So I think he's going to get a decent setup in here. He's probably going to be a contender, but as usual, I also think he'll be overbet.
Yeah, I think we have a similar view of him from a price standpoint. A horse who will be a bigger price is the number 1, Full Authority. We'll take a look at his past performances in Timeform US, and he ran a big race coming off the layoff at Oaklawn. When he got to the front end, set a moderate pace and won by 3 lengths. Hasn't been able to replicate that form in his last couple of starts, and I wonder if the rail draw might not be ideal for a horse that wants to be forward but has some faster speeds drawn to the outside.
Yeah, and he hasn't run very well from the rail in his last 2 starts at Oaklawn Park either. I do wonder if they're just going to be more aggressive given how those last 2 races played out. It hasn't worked out very well. So maybe they just go for it and try to apply more pressure, but he does seem up against it from that inside post.
The number 2 is Prevalence, a horse that was once well regarded by his connections, has never really panned out to turn out to be the kind of graded stakes winning runner that they initially thought he could have been. He does have a grade 3 victory on his resume from last spring in 2022. Since then, he's had plenty of disappointing results. I wonder if 6 furlongs is a bit on the short side for him, especially considering that he's another horse that when he's most successful, he's forwardly placed. And I just wonder if he can get that position here.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. He certainly did have that early promise. He's a horse who was actually 3-1 in the Wood Memorial as his connections had him on the Derby Trail. I think his form might be a little hidden. You can ignore that turf race last time out. I don't think his race against Endorse was as bad as it looks. He got a 114 speed figure, pressing a pretty quick pace in the 1-turn mile. But I have similar reservations as you with the turn back to 6. That might be overdoing it just a little bit distance-wise.
Let's check out the last race for both Hello Hot Rod and Al Loves Josie, who both come out of the Frank Whiteley Stakes from mid-April at Laurel. And I do want to note the trouble that Al Loves Josie gets into from basically the top of the stretch until the 8th pole. Definitely take a look at him being highlighted. Hello Hot Rod had a better trip. He was outside of all of that. And when I watched this race and other races from that April 15th card, I really did feel like the outside paths were preferred that day. So I think that Hello Hot Rod got the right kind of trip, but I don't want to take anything away from the current form that he's in, because he's a horse that when he first came into the new connections, I think they privately purchased him back in 2021, had some trouble finding himself, but for his last 3 races for Brittany Russell have definitely been a step in the right direction, especially 2 of the last 3, including the last one.
Yeah, I like what I saw from him. And as I said, I think the pace is going to get kind of hot. You see his past performances, and it looks like he's a horse that should be on the front end. But I'm not sure at this 6 furlong distance. I would tend to think he's going to be more of a mid-pack sort. All his races at Laurel, those 1 turn, if you're not familiar with Laurel, or the 1 miles are all around 1 turn. So I think it's his thing that it's just maybe it's a little bit short for him. But as I said, if the pace heats up, I expect him to be mid-pack, and I do think he'll have a nice finishing kick in here.
And then the number 4, Al Loves Josie, who finished much further back in that race, but you saw a portion of that trouble. And that's a trip that I would advise you go back and watch the entirety of, because he also was off to a bit of a rough start, was too far back in the early stages, was on the rail, which I didn't think was the place to be that day at Laurel, and then got completely sawed off in traffic in the stretch. So I would not take his last result at face value. And prior to that, Al Loves Josie had gotten into great form going the 6 furlong distance, 2 and 3 back, was facing weaker fields in those races, but if he can run those kinds of speed figures here, he's a major player at a price.
He is. The one concern I have about him, and I totally agree with you in that last race. I think it's a total line through. You can look at his other two, but my one concern is that he's a horse who does his best running on the front end. And there are a couple other speeds, as I mentioned in here, to deal with, and Straight No Chaser and Wonder Where Craig is, and he's going to be inside them. So I wonder what kind of tactics they're going to employ. He did win from slightly off the pace 2 back, but most of his success has come on the lead.
Yeah, he was a real speedball at the beginning of his career. It feels like he's mentally maturing lately, but we'll see if he can work out a trip in this race. And the last horse we'll talk about is the number 5, Willie Boy. Craig, this is a horse that might have been favored in this race going back to the summer of 2022, but it just feels like his form has steadily fallen apart over the past half a year or so. And based on his last couple of performances, it's hard to build a case for him.
Yeah, it is. I mean, I didn't want to leave him out of the rundown, even though he's long odds, because he does have back races that could win. He's a horse who can win on the lead. He's pressed the pace, but I agree. His form seems to have headed south. His one good finish was in a pretty slow race at Tampa. The other 3 of his last 4 starts, he wasn't competitive.
Let's throw up our picks for this Maryland Sprint, and we're going in slightly different directions here, though we're both taking horses out of that Frank Whiteley Stakes. Craig, I do believe that the number 10 Wonder Where Craig is the horse to beat. I'm not against him. You're more against him than I am, but I just think he's a horse that isn't going to be much of a price in here, so I wanted to find somebody else that could offer more value, and for me, that is the number 4, Loves Josie, who had that trip last time and has the prior 6 furlong form to make him competitive here. So I'm just hoping the trip can work out on Saturday, because I do believe the price is going to be right.
Yeah, and I went with the other horse from that race, Hello Hot Rod, as you mentioned. I like the 6 furlongs in this spot because I think there's some hidden speed. We show 2 very fast horses on front in the pace projector, but I won't be surprised if maybe another horse or 2 join them, including Full Authority and your selection, Now Loves Josie.
It's the number 9, Hello Hot Rod for Craig, and the number 4, Loves Josie for me in the Maryland Sprint on Saturday at Pimlico. Good luck if you're playing the Preakness card on Saturday.